What is going on, Hive Warriors? So there are roughly around 2,700 studies tackling intermittent fasting, dating all the way back to about 1946. And 1946, I believe, is the first study involving fasting that we've ever had. But moving forward to where we are now, it's exponentially has ramped up every year, year over year, in terms of how many studies we get per year. Now we get about maybe 333 studies a year involving intermittent fasting. Not all of those studies involve weight loss. For example, there are a recent study that just came out. It looks at intermittent fasting and how it could be applied to, or its application to, cancer cells and things of that nature, therapeutic uses of intermittent fasting. So there's so many studies involving intermittent fasting that don't necessarily involve weight loss. Now, there are studies, obviously, there's a lot more studies that involve weight loss when it comes to intermittent fasting. And of those studies, there are meta-analysis that extrapolate many of those studies, sometimes taking thousands of those studies and putting it in, or about 1,000 or 700 to 1,000 to 1,500, and putting that into a system, and then getting the data from that, extrapolating the data from that, and telling you, oh, okay, well, this method is better than that method. So every year, I re-up every single year to find out what is the best intermittent fasting system based on the studies. Now, I want to be very, very clear here. When I talk about what the best intermittent fasting system is based on the studies, that does not necessarily mean that it will be the best for you. Because even with those studies, when they're positive, even when the person or when the subjects overall get a positive reaction to using intermittent fasting in terms of weight loss, or in terms of abdominal fat loss or visceral fat loss, what have you, there's still outliers in that group. So what does that mean? So if 85% of people in the intermittent fasting group lost like a huge amount of weight in comparison to the just the caloric restriction group, that's 85%, while the caloric restriction group, 45% lost a good amount of weight. What that means is that this group did better than that group, right? But it's still 85%. What does that mean? That means there's still a 15% that did not lose weight, or didn't lose it to the degree of the other 85%. So those are outliers in every group. However, because that group was 85% successful, that is a successful study showing that that method, whatever it is, that hypothetical method worked, right? So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. A study can show you what can be likely, because those are human bodies, you're a human body, but we're still biologically different. So always understand that concept. Let this give you an idea, right? Let studies give you an idea of what can work, what cannot work. But definitely always ensure that you understand what works for you and what doesn't work for you, because at the end of the day, even the studies could be showing a positive reaction to a certain intermittent fasting system, but it doesn't work with your lifestyle, or you don't enjoy it, or you have something already set that works way better for you, just based off of the things you have to do throughout the day, right? So just always keep that in mind. Even when I do these videos, they're not to say that your intermittent fasting system does not work, is not better than this one. That is not what we're saying here at Fledge Fitness. What we're saying is that this is what the study is showing to be the most successful, to have the highest success rate out of all the other intermittent fasting systems. All right, so with that being said, the intermittent fasting system that has shown to be the most successful is still the 16-8. It is still the 16-8 intermittent fasting system, used to be called the lean gains system back in the days. Now everything is just referred to by their number. 16-8 is the most successful one, and by successful it means that when 16-8 is pit up against any other diet, or pit up against just caloric restriction, in comparison to the other intermittent fasting system like alternate day fasting, for example, or 20 hours of fasting, 4 hours of eating, or whatever, all of the different ones, 18 hours of fasting, right? When pit up against all of those different methods of fasting, the eat, stop, eat, also another one where you eat one day, you don't the next. When looking at their success rate in terms of studies via the meta-analysis, via the new studies that have come out, and those studies being put together, extrapolating the data there, the most successful one that tends to be the one that wins out is always the 16-8. Sometimes even when they pit the 16-8 against alternate day fasting, or pit the 16-8 against, the eat, stop, eat, or what have you, right? Or other time frames like 20 hours of fasting, 4 hours of eating, or 1 meal a day is another one when put against intermittent fasting. 16-8, which 16-8 has become so popular that when people say intermittent fasting, they sometimes are referring to the 16-8. It's almost like it's been given the name intermittent fasting, when in reality, there are other methods of intermittent fasting, right? 20 hours of fasting is intermittent fasting as well. 1 meal a day is intermittent fasting as well. Alternate day fasting, they don't want to kind of like they're trying to make intermittent fasting become put into a different box than if it's more than intraday. So if you're fasting longer than a day, or if it's a thing that requires multiple days to be completed, right, like an eat, stop, eat, or an alternate day fasting, then they're kind of starting to try to label those not intermittent fasting. But in reality, it's still intermittent fasting. You're fasting intermittently. It's just intra-week, right? Intra-day. It's not necessarily trapped to a day. I still think that all that stuff is intermittent fasting, to be quite honest. There's also long-term fasting. Of course, like 5 days of fasting or whatever, which we don't recommend here in this channel because of the lack of studies, right? It's not to attack your way of fasting or anything like that. It's because of the lack of studies, which has always been my position, is just as long as there's enough studies to kind of back the power of what you're doing, then we can definitely recommend it here. I just care about your health, safety, and your ability to lose weight as optimally as possible. So I'm sorry if that feels like an attack to you, but I promise you, I am not trying to attack you. So 16-8 still holds the mantra of the best one. Even when they do the meta-analysis, the study that tends to have the most power is the time restricted eating, and time restricted eating is the 16-8. When you look at the methodology of the study itself in the TRE, time restricted eating, you'll see that they were using the 16-8, and that had the more powerful results that ended up boosting a lot of the intermittent fasting, the actual what came out of those studies in comparison to the calorie restriction. And that from meta-analysis, when you see these meta-analysis where intermittent fasting does very, very well in comparison to calorie restriction, you'll see that a lot of the stuff that came out of it, when you actually look at the individual studies, it's the time restricted eating that pulled a lot of the weight in terms of the success to show that intermittent fasting was more successful than just caloric restriction. And notice I say just caloric restriction because you still have to be at a caloric restriction. It's just intermittent fasting with the caloric restriction in comparison to just the caloric restriction without intermittent fasting. So I don't want people to get that confused. So yeah, 16-8 was the intermittent fasting system that was the best one last year. It was the one that was the best one the year before that. It was the one that was the best one the year before even that, right? It tends to be the most successful one. There's a few theories that I feel that make it the best one, right? I think it's enough time so that you're actually activating some of the post-absorptive kind of systems, the metabolic switch over where you're kind of tapping into some of that body fat. So I think it's enough time to get to that. For example, if you do like 12 hours of fasting, I don't think it's enough time for you to put a dent or move the needle. While with 16, I think it is enough time for you to be able to put a dent into that whole system when you're doing that metabolic switch over. You're burning body fat, you're turning body fat into ketones, right? You might not come out with, like, if you did a blood test showing that you're in a ketogenic state, right? Because that takes producing massive amounts of ketones, but you are still doing something with the 16.8. And I think that it also strikes this nice middle ground of being able to adhere to it for a long period of time. If you're getting somebody into a study, if you're bringing somebody into a study, a lot of times prerequisites for that is that you've never done the fasting ever, right? That's one of the prerequisites, because that could throw off your baseline and how your body reacts. They're trying to get somebody who has never done it and trying to get that person to see what their body does when they finally do it, right? So there's usually a washout period, and then they start the actual study for them to pay attention if intermittent fasting works over this other weight loss system. So what does that mean, right? It means that the adherence is going to be difficult if it's a one meal a day, right? If we're taking you and we're like, hey, you've never done fasting before, but now you're going to do one meal a day, that's going to be hard, right? That's going to be much harder for a person to adhere to, right? Now, it's not difficult, and then after, maybe 2 weeks, you do get used to it. But for some people that never done it before, it's going to be hard. So we don't know for sure if they're following it to a T because it's just too difficult, and then they're just saying that, yeah, no, we are still following it, because a lot of these studies, obviously you get to do it from home, and they check in and they try to keep you accountable as much as possible, but you could still be like, I got something here, I ate something there. But with the 16.8, I feel like it's enough time, you're eating within an 8-hour window, that you might be like, this is a little bit difficult, but I think I could power through this. And then over a week, you realize it's super easy to do. And then you just keep doing it and keep doing it. And it's not even an issue. So I think it's the most easiest to adhere to, that also puts a biological dent and moves the biological needle for you to actually get some success from it. So I suspect that 16.8 will be the best one again next year, but we're always going to check all of the studies, the meta-analysis, the yearly stuff, to see in terms of weight loss specifically, to see if it has changed. But for it being 16.8 every single year, I highly doubt that another one will overtake 16.8 in the greater scheme of all of the intermittent fasting systems, or the fasting systems, if you will. All right, hopefully this video has helped you guys. I think I've explained it a little bit better so you guys can understand what this means when I talk about it. Sometimes when I do these videos, people get upset and they're like, oh, you're trying to say that, I do the alternate day fasting and that's not better than 16.8. No, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like, that's not what I'm trying to say. The alternate day fasting, if it's working for you, is actually better than the 16.8, because for you, it works. And that's the only thing that's the most important thing, or that's the only thing that matters, right? For me, for example, 20 hours of fasting and 4 hours of eating is what I do. And I've actually fused the 1 meal a day and the warrior diet. I call it the war mad diet, or the war mad diet, warrior diet and 1 meal a day. And sometimes it's 1 meal a day, sometimes it's within a 4-hour window, sometimes it's 1 meal a day, sometimes it's within a 4-hour window, but always within the same range, right? So I can be flexible with the switching from 20 hours of fasting to 1 meal a day. It's easy for me. And this is me knowing that the 16.8 is the most popular one, right? It's the most successful one out of all of the other ones. Because the 20 hours or the war mad, the splice of those two work the best for me, right? So that's, it is what it is. What works for me is what I care about more then what the data shows is the best one. Now, if you've never done it and you're thinking, which one should I pick? Maybe this can help you, right? Maybe this can help you. Maybe you pick one that could help you adhere to it much easier. And you know that most of the studies show that it has a higher success rate than all of the other ones, right? So there you have it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I want to know what's your intermittent fasting system. Which is the one that you do? I kind of want to gauge the comments to see what does my audience or the audience of Fledge Fitness actually do, generally speaking, because I'm super interested in that. I've never actually asked that question, which is bizarre. It's been like since 2016. I've never asked that question. I want to know exactly, like, what do you guys do? Like, do you guys do the 16-8? Is that a thing? Or are you guys doing multiple day fasting, or one meal a day, what have you? Let me know down in the comment section below so I can kind of tally it up and see what's the thing that's done the most by the you guys that are commenting. All right, until the next one, guys, peace out.